Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. If you're a retail marketer in Canada, chances are pretty good you know Eric Morris. I've known Eric for well over a decade, and I learn something new every time we catch up. Google's managing director of retail has been at this Dent the Universe company for more than 20 years. He's one of the original 500. Over the course of his career, he has witnessed vast growth within Google and across the industry and their evolving relationship with retailers in Canada. In this episode of the Voice of Retail podcast, Eric and I unpack the latest topics at the intersection of technology and retail. Together, we break down key forecasts and trends and address some surprising misconceptions about the tech giant. In an increasingly competitive retail environment, Eric underlines Google's commitment to Canadian retailers, both big and small, and tackles the tough issues that come from the platform's growth and sophistication for advertisers of all sizes.
Well, all of those principles hold true today, but I think you're right in that the more experienced retailers, maybe who have the best data or have been at this the longest and have been able to optimize it, or have hired the best or the smartest people, may have a leg up.
Let's listen in now. Eric, welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you, my friend?
I am wonderful. Thanks for having me. It's nice to hear you again.
Yeah, listen, I was thinking back to the last time you and I were physically in person. I think it was at the old Spoke Club, and we had a big chunky mic sitting between us. We had a great conversation, which I'll remind the listeners to page back to that, because we really got into your background and your origin story, which is a great interview. But for those maybe who didn't hear it, or for those maybe who want to hear it all over again, give us a little bit of your background and what you do at Google.
Yeah, well, I'll be brief. I'm actually coming up on 20 years at Google, which is a frightening thought. I joined when there was one other employee in Canada and maybe 500 globally, and now we have over 2,000 in Canada and well over 100,000 globally. Over the last 5 years, I've been running our retail practice here at Google Canada. So we work with the top 30 or 40 largest retailers in Canada. They include the large big box omni-channel retailers like a Walmart or Home Depot or Canadian Tire. E-commerce only brands, think Article or Rove Concepts out in Vancouver, Essence, in the luxury retailer in Montreal. The direct-to-consumer retailers, so think like Lululemon and Canada Goose are two good examples there. And a couple of the large players who are, for lack of better terms, providing the infrastructure for retail today, namely Shopify and Lightspeed. So it's a really interesting cross-section of retail. All of these companies are in Canada. Many have Canadian customers. Some, like in the case of a Canada Goose or a Lululemon or Shopify, have customers all over the world. And that's what we do. We help them use Google products to drive sales, whether it's online or in store, and build their brand, where YouTube obviously is a great platform for that.
Yeah, right on. Now, there's a lot of people, in my perception, who work in retail, because I come across all kinds of different people. In fact, I was interviewing someone from Google who was in the retail space at a recent RCC conference. Tell me a little bit of the structure there. Like, how many of you focus on retail, and how does that work? Like, do you dedicate by kind of channel, or you dedicate by vertical or by size? Just give me so the listeners have a sense of when you say the retail practice. What does the retail practice look like?
Yeah, so I think probably similar to a consulting organization or others, we have an industry focused team. So we believe that the insights and the expertise and the offering to a retailer may be different than a bank or a CPG. So we have a large number of people. It's actually the largest industry of focus for us, devoted to retail specifically. And so within that, we do have areas of focus even within retail, because I think working with a retailer who has stores is very different than working with a retailer who, say, only sells online.
Right.
Working with a retailer who focuses on the Canadian market is different than a Canadian retailer who has a global footprint. So we focus on retail, and then even within that, we have focus depending on the type of retailer and their specific needs.
And last week at the Reset Retail, I interviewed Jamie Gargasugia. She was wonderful, and she, I guess, oversees the direct to consumer. Tell me how that fits in, just so kind of orient people who kind of listen to the same thing.
That's right. So Jamie works with Lululemon and Canada Goose, so the direct-to-consumer retail, some of which have stores. Yeah. Others don't. Like in Essence is, essentially all online. Clearly Contacts out west There's a large appliance parts retailer in Nova Scotia that we've worked with really since our beginning here in Canada called Part Select, a deceptively large, very, very successful Canadian business, and works with them as well. So it's the brands that are selling their own products direct. Some have stores like a Canada Goose and Lululemon, others don't. But that's Jamie's area of focus.
Probably one of the most read about, written about, studied organizations in the world, this Google thing of yours. Tell me something that would surprise us about you.
It's a good question. I think the bar is high because I think Google is a well-known brand and to your point, is written about and discussed a lot. I think, and maybe different things will surprise people differently. I believe, and of course I'm biased, I've been here for 20 years and I've loved every minute of it. I mean, I think for a large company and one that went from an underdog to not an underdog today, I think we've done a remarkable job as we've grown, holding true to our values. And those values have changed, and we're not perfect. No company is perfect. And I think, quote unquote, big tech is under fire. But I think, not all tech companies, not all companies are equal. And I think one of the ways that we've differentiated ourselves versus some peers in the industry that your audience will also have read about is I think our values have held. Google started as a company around this really, really important idea of organizing the world's information and making it useful and accessible. And it was a really big, ambitious mission that I really do think has changed the world and was designed to change the world. And I even think in our own little world of marketing and advertising, and that's where I've spent the last 20 years at Google. I mean, there's that old adage, 50% of my advertising works. I just don't know which 50%. I mean, it's a really big, ambitious idea to make advertising and marketing more effective, more measurable. And we've remained true to that as well on the business side. But I think our values have held true. We're focused on the long term. I mean, Google will forego short-term revenue to do what's best for the users of our products and for our retailers and for our customers. And I think that too is very unusual in the business world.
I was going to say, I mean, I think back to my history with Google, and I'm as OG in some ways as you are. I remember a guy who was working with me as we were launching HBC saying, hey, he's named Darren Keane and he works for Apple now. He said, there's this, we got to figure this search thing out. And there's this new thing, paid search. And these couple of guys, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, they're kind of just a little startup. Should we pay attention to them?
Yeah.
And, I remember going to a conference and in the US and some people were going, hey, and it was like this evangelist saying, hey, you guys know about this Google thing where you can have pay per performance and measurability? Does everybody know about that? And you look around the audience and everybody was looking at each other going, who? Boy, so far, so fast in 20 years. It's pretty incredible, really.
It is.
All right. Well, that brings us right up to current events. Let's talk about trends for the holidays. We're talking here in October. We've got the holidays staring us down, so to speak, or we're great anticipation for holiday 2021. Anything you've seen about consumer behaviors you would comment on? You guys are always out there checking in on habits and behaviors and stuff like that. Anything you think might be different than we might expect? How are you seeing the holiday?
Well, it's a great question. Of course, really timely as we're taping or recording in early October. I mean, I think every year holiday is different. So, I mean, I've personally been working exclusively with retailers for the last 5 years, and I think back even just 5 years ago, I think holiday shopping online was typified then as sort of a cyber weekend event. So it was Black Friday, Cyber Weekend, and then Cyber Monday. And then I think what's happened over the last few years is every year it seemed to get started earlier. And I think also has gone on later. So I think the sort of last day before, your gift would certainly arrive before Christmas. That has, I think, as the infrastructure has been built out in Canada and shopping behavior has changed, I think that has gone on deeper into the holiday than every year. So we used to have these really, really big peak moments that were, call it 4 or 5 days. And I think now that curve has been stretched out. We're holiday shopping starting a lot earlier than ever before. and also continuing later than expected, right through Boxing Day and even into January. So I think that always happened. I think last year, which was really the first under COVID, I think there were a few things that everyone was watching very carefully. The first was, would Canada Post and the couriers be able to get all of these boxes that now everyone's, trying to get their gifts delivered online with stores closed? Would everything arrive on time, or would we have to order really, really early? And so last year we saw shopping start even earlier than ever, really, beginning of October. I think that was juiced a little bit by a Amazon Prime Day that occurred last year in October.
That's right.
Whereas previously it had been a summer event. So between like the COVID issues and then Prime Day specifically, last year in particular, shopping started much, much earlier than ever. The deals came out earlier. The advertising to try and prompt that shopping behavior was earlier than ever. And so that's where we were last year. And so I think this year, like, what are we watching for this year? And I think there's sort of a few key things. It's a long way of getting to your question. I think the first is that those trends, holiday shopping starting earlier than ever, have continued. And even without a Prime Day in the market, what we're seeing here is that almost a third of Canadians, we've been surveying Canadians every 2 weeks since COVID began. So we have this amazing piece of research. We've been doing it every 2 weeks in this country. It's unique from that standpoint. And roughly a third of Canadians, as of early October, have already started their holiday shopping.
Do you think Canadians are hearing this supply chain chaos message? Because there's certainly retailers. In fact, last week, Robin Lee from Lee Valley Tools put out a note to his customers saying, "Listen, you better shop early because I'm not sure I can replenish again." So do you think that's resonating, or do you think it's more organic than that?
Well, first of all, I think it depends. So I think the largest retailers with the most clout in the market are more likely to be able to weather the supply chain hits and have been able to make the investment in inventory, and are the ones who can pay more for shipping containers and other things. So I think whatever the supply chain issue is, it's not going to affect all retailers equally. There are examples. Altitude Sports in Montreal is an example of a retailer that emailed their customers, I think a couple of weeks ago, encouraging them to shop early because it's possible the gift you want may not be available later in the holiday shopping season. I was on the Toronto Sun's website yesterday. I like reading Steve Simmons' weekly Sunday column. Front page of the Toronto Sun was the supply chain issue.
Crazy,
and
right?
What it meant for shoppers this holiday season. And to me, that really represented this issue's gone mainstream. It's not just like a Wall Street Journal or a Globe and Mail industry article. This is something now consumers are starting to think about. And on Google, because we historically have used searches as a proxy for demand or interest in topics or even products, and that's of course the interest for retailers, but searches in Canada for supply chain have reached like an all-time high as of last week. And you can see that on Google Trends. It's a publicly available tool. So I actually noticed that this morning. So I think it's very, very much top of mind. You have retailers like, I think it's Best Buy in the US that have come out and said, hey, shop early. And if the item you buy is discounted later on in the holiday season, we will issue you a refund.
Yeah.
You've all sorts of other retailers starting to front load their promotions and their advertising as a result. So I think similar to last year, like that drumbeat is getting a little bit louder, all of which is to say holiday shopping is going to start earlier than ever again.
It's interesting, as you say about supply chain. I mean, I kind of think supply chain is more a little bit sand in the gears than it is a broomstick and the bicycle spoke. In other words, what the interesting part of it, and maybe we'll see it in your data, is the ability for consumers to substitute. In other words, I can't get it in red, I'll take it in blue. Like, it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, right? Consumer behavior, I think, is going to be really interesting to watch this holiday.
It's not, and you certainly hope as a retailer they substitute with you and not somewhere else. But I think you're right. People are still going to get gifts. They're going to find something to buy. And I heard one large retailer say, if we've got it in stock, people are going to buy it.
Yeah.
So I think certainly Canadians shopping earlier than ever is the biggest trend. And we saw this, even recently with back to school, Mother's Day, Father's Day to sort of a lesser extent because it's slightly less of a shopping moment, much to my chagrin. But, these holidays continue to see people searching for products and shopping online earlier every year. So if you look at sort of queries on Google in Canada for Mother's Day, and Mother's Day gifts, like it started a few days and even a week before last year, which was earlier than the year before. So it's just sort of this trend, all shopping, not just Black Friday and holiday specific, that people are starting their shopping earlier. We're seeing a lot of interest in gifts, specifically people coming online, Google or otherwise, looking for just ideas. So gifts for, call it boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, 12-year-old daughter have doubled versus a year ago. And so people are coming online looking for ideas. It's not just sort of sniping where they know exactly what they want and who can get it to me the fastest or the cheapest. People are coming online looking for inspiration. I mean, that's probably not a new thing, but I think being able to quantify it and say it's doubled versus a year ago.
Wow. Do you think that's because, and we certainly saw this was the case in the peaks of the COVID era, that consumers are very mission oriented in the stores. They didn't want to hang out. They didn't want to, browse. They didn't really want to talk to anybody. They just wanted to get the heck in and get the heck out. And have they substituted, whether it's on your platform or other platforms, kind of, I'm looking for inspiration. I don't want to spend much time in the stores, but maybe I can find it here. Do you think that's what's happening behind the scenes?
I think it's possible. I mean, I would probably build on that a little bit and say, it's not that people aren't going to your store, but they are visiting your digital store first. And I think that's the nuance. And, we've seen this across like many industries. It's a little bit different than the traditional retail that you and I would focus on. But if you think of like the automotive experience, how that's evolved, really the first visit to the dealership is the one you do from your home. It's that virtual or digital dealership. And when you actually arrive in the store, you're far more informed and you know exactly what it is that you're looking to do. So our message to retailers would be, hey, when people are looking for inspiration, let them find you, let them watch your videos, let them be inspired, right? Let them engage with like your virtual store, see what inventory is available so that they're more likely to choose you if they decide to actually go into a store.
As we think about the post-COVID era, it's nice to be able to say they're, within shot put range, we got a post-COVID era. Anything that your data tells you that might be permanently different about how consumers behave? When you talk to all those great retailers, and between their conversations and your observations and this wealth of data and the global footprint that you've got so you can observe things around the world, any themes coming out? Again, I always ask people, structural changes versus temporary adjustments kind of thing. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts. I think one is, look, Canada had historically been behind in e-commerce across like all categories. I mean, groceries, the most obvious one where we were basically non-existent, but even in general merchandise, it was probably at half the rate of the US. And I think COVID was this forcing function in Canada where, e-commerce probably tripled, quadrupled, quintupled for many retailers during peak COVID when their stores were closed, and has now settled in at a level that is, double the historical level here in Canada. So and what's been really interesting is as stores have reopened, yes, for some retailers, e-commerce as a percentage of sales may have gone down, but it's still trending well above historicals. So I think that's the most, obvious thing that's changed is that there's this new water level, for e-commerce and digitally influenced sales, even people seeking out inspiration and making that first visit to the store. It's sort of online from their sofa or bed or wherever they may be. But e-commerce doubling, I think, is the most obvious thing. And I think for many retailers, it's now of a material number that it really can't be ignored. So you have some large brands like a Canada Goose or a Lululemon where, e-commerce is a very material percentage of their sales. But I think even for, call it a Canadian Tire or Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's or Best Buy, when it's doubled, even for those large retailers, it's now at a level where it matters, right? It's now call it, 20% of sales. It's now like Tuesday sales, right? Or
Yeah.
like Tuesday and half of Wednesday.
And which in some cases is a good thing, because as you know, given all the time you've worked with retailers, sometimes volume solves some sins. In other words, a few orders a day it's hard to be efficient. But when you get, 500 orders a day, you can become very efficient, and it actually starts to drive a little bit of ROI back into the process, right? It's kind of, we don't always think of it that way, but it is sometimes the case.
Yeah, look, I think it certainly gives them scale where hopefully they can operate more efficiently. I think it gives them executive level attention where now you're getting more mind share from the executives in the company, where it's incumbent on them to really figure this out, to figure out the cost structure, to figure out the behavior of the people who are shopping online and getting them in store, the people who are in store hoping they'll shop online. I mean, every retailer knows people who shop in both channels are the most valuable.
Yeah, right.
So look, you'd ask me that, what's changed. E-commerce, I think, is the most obvious one. I think other things that have changed is, I do think that we have seen a shift in Canadian values that are permanent here. And I'll give you a couple examples. I mean, if you think of a global pandemic labeled on top of all sorts of social justice issues, race and otherwise, I think we're seeing Canadians increasingly making decisions on what they buy and where they buy from based on their values. And so whether it's local businesses, I mean, this was really interesting for us. There was that surge in people shopping locally during peak COVID. There is still, I think searches for local businesses are still up 80% over the last year. People still want to shop locally, even as we come out the other end of this. People are looking for secondhand stores, not necessarily because it's cheaper, but because they may believe it's more aligned with their values in terms of reducing waste and doing good for the environment.
Well, so it's interesting, that first point, because as you and I were talking about off mic, it's all impacted. Some of that where you shop, of course, is impacted by where you go to work. And if you're not working in the downtown cores anymore, I mean, it does feel like you might see a renaissance for local stores, just because that's where the people, or more of the people, are, right? And your searches would kind of reveal that. Maybe I didn't shop locally. Maybe I just shop near work, but now I need to find, or want to find, and want to help those stores in my community. It feels like it's the intersection of one neutral and one very good trend, I would say.
Well, this is where I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for any retailer business that needs to make a decision on real estate, because this is very, very tricky. So I'll give you the Google example. Our office, which probably had 500 or 600 people in downtown Toronto, we were all in the office call it every day before COVID. None of us are in the office right now, other than a few on a voluntary basis, and we'll eventually move to 3 days in the office a week. I used to buy lots of stuff in the Path because it was convenient. So when I go back to the office 3 days a week, right, will my behavior around shopping closer to where I live or shopping online, is that more likely to win out? Or will I use these like days in the office? These are like my excursion days. Right. These are the days where it's most convenient for me to shop outside of my neighborhood to stores I wouldn't normally have exposure to. So maybe I will continue to shop in the Path, even as I spend now only 60% of my working time downtown. Or maybe that's your time in the office to be most productive, and you never leave because you got other days. I mean, Google is so interesting, as you know, because you just, as an organization, just did one of the biggest real estate transactions in New York history, right? $2.1 billion for offices. Like you're going in both directions at the same time. Like we all try to figure out where the smart money's going. It's hard to imagine smarter money some days than Google. So it's it's interesting to watch. 2.1 billion. That's not checking out of the couch. That's a big decision. At the same time, trying to for all of us to understand what the future looks like. So interesting, right? I think so. And look, we're opening a new office in Toronto in about a year's time as well. So we've made, that bet, continue to make that bet even here, in Canada. But I think how much of that COVID behavior sticks, I think is really the big question. Like I'll give you an example. And you and I spoke about this, I think like a week or two ago. It's an example from my daughter, who's a swimmer, and she was interested in a new pair of goggles. And we were showing her some pictures of goggles online, and she said to us, did you order them? And she didn't say like, can we go to a store and buy them? Can we go to a store and buy them? Or even, did you buy them? It's, did you order them or could you order them? Because for her as a 6-year-old, those are the types of things that just magically arrive at your door in a box. Yeah. And so I think one of the far out trends, I'm sort of watching, and this is informed by another industry expert that I've spoken with, is, are we going to see a rise in, for lack of a better term, something called contactless shopping, where you'll have a swath of the population, habits formed, during COVID or otherwise, who never go into a store for the majority of their purchases. They either get everything delivered to their home, or they take advantage of curbside pickup, which is really that third way to shop. Yeah. But short of like really exceptional in-person customer service experiences, or where you need customer service, for most of those things that are just sort of a ritual to buy, or exactly what you want, maybe you just buy everything or most of those things contactlessly, which I think is a really big idea. Like at YouTube, we've seen over time here, right, the percentage of Canadians who are cord cutters or cord nevers go up. Right, there's a whole generation now that would never think the first thing they do when they move into a new apartment is to make sure they have cable service. That's right. That's what I used to do, but that's not what a lot of people do today. And similarly, are there going to be people who, again, cut out stores and shop mostly online wherever possible as a new habit that's formed during COVID? I think it's a really interesting idea, and one that will obviously take many, many years to play out, but I think it's worth watching.
Yeah, it just highlights this chasm between experience and efficiency, right? Like, it's a very, very efficient way to shop, but from an experience perspective, there's some experiential components to it. It's a nice product delivered at your door, but it's a very different experience, which is a nice segue into a conversation you and I had a couple of months ago. So I'm kind of curious what happened. We were talking, you asked me, what do you think the big trends are 3 years out? What are those big trends? And I joked, I said, I don't know what they're going to be 3 months out, let alone 3 years, but okay, I'll take a shot at it. So imagine you talk to a few people, any early conclusions, but any early thoughts around what these big mega trends are from your research and from your resources?
Well, I think this idea of like a swath of the population that mostly, if not entirely, shops online is really interesting. Another that I've heard that I think is quite interesting is a increased focus by Canadians on their health. So that would be another example of maybe behavior that's changed during COVID. Again, a forcing function of a pandemic. Which would have all sorts of implications, from whether it's the Apple Watch you buy, where they keep they keep adding in all sorts of new health features, and maybe that really is the killer app of smart watches, to working out in your home, to supplements. Like there's all healthy food and groceries and living. When you think about a broader focus on health, it has the potential to sort of rewire lots of different things that we eat or that we wear or that we buy. So I think health is a really, really interesting one to watch. And I think it's related to values, but I think it's slightly different. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think over the long run, you will see this recalibration of retail from a bunch of things. And I think of AI. I interviewed this MIT professor last week, and we were talking about AI being overhyped in the short term, but under expected in the long run. And I think this idea of anticipatory retail is really interesting to me. In other words, and I spoke to Robbie Kelman-Baxter, who's this membership guru, work with Netflix, and you put those two things together, and I think we'll get to a day. And maybe it gets at that never go into store, but I don't know. I don't see it so black and white. But I'm looking for things and they just show up. Like right now, you've got to go ask for something, or it gets, that's efficient. But with all the data that many retailers have, maybe they'll just send it to you. And then of course you can return it, but they'll get so good at predicting. And I think that's been a clarion call for years.
It's so interesting. I think Frank and Oak tried this in Montreal many years ago? Yeah. I think they called it the Hunt Club, and they were sort of banking on men who didn't like to shop. So we'll just keep sending you shirts and things that fit you and hope that you like them. It's a really interesting idea. And I think, Michael, one of the things that has surprised me that it hasn't happened faster. There is one very, very large retailer in Canada that has created that Netflix-like experience for shopping where you go to their homepage and everything on the homepage is curated to you based on what you've looked at or added to your cart or bought before. And I think they've said that up to 40% of their total sales come through product recommendations. And you compare that to virtually every other retailer in the space where if I shop at a store all the time and you've never shopped at them, like you and I somehow both get the same homepage. I
thought we'd be farther ahead in that. We were talking about this in 2000. Everybody gets a different homepage. But I don't know, I thought we'd be way farther ahead in 2021 with that. I mean, even the best now kind of do an okay job of it. It's hard. It's hard. And B, I think there's the concern that if I just show you what you want, and this was actually this professor from MIT's thing, all you're going to do is make, it's like an echo chamber, right? Well, I think you wanted more tuna, so here's more tuna, when really you might be open to buying 3 other things. It's a really tricky one, right?
Well, I think that's true. And I think certainly that sort of product dimension, that is a risk there. But I think even at the customer level, a large retailer knows who their best customers are.
Yeah.
And they know who their worst customers are, or they know who's never shopped with them before. And do they create a differentiated experience with the website, with the email, with the customer service for their best customers? And I think the truth is most don't.
Yeah.
And I think that really is a very, very big opportunity. If you're worried about that echo chamber and people only buying what they've shopped with you for before, that's okay. But at least know who your best customers are. Many of them do. And do something different to make sure you retain them and also try and find more of them.
Well, it works until you realize, as we did in some of the companies I work with, that even your best customers are only spending, X percent of their wallet with you. Like, in other words, we did some research, 30% of their share wallet. And they were the best customers we had. So you're like, wow, we're not getting 70% of that share wallet. So, it started to frame our thinking. Last kind of couple of questions for you. You've been very generous with your time. I wanted to talk about Google. I want to talk about what you guys do. And, in the early days, and I referred to it back then, it was anybody who had a sense for performance marketing could go into Google, put down a credit card, and achieve amazing things, right? It was like wizardry. It was like science fiction. Wait a minute. He searched on something. You're like, I remember I showed it to somebody. He said, oh my God, you're like a wizard. Like anybody could do it. I wasn't particularly steeped in the math, but I figured out how to do it. It feels like 20 years later, it's hard to get, I wouldn't want to call it an advantage, but it's hard for businesses that don't have the resources to hire people that are really, really, really steeped and specialized in your product to win. Do you guys think about that? Like the platform becomes a bit more efficient or works better for those with the resources to use it, and it's kind of lost a bit of its zip for the small business. How do you guys think about that?
I think that criticism is fair. And I think if I think back to 2002, those very early days when we were introducing Google to the market, and I think it was revolutionary at the time to have this auction, and you didn't get a better price if you spent more or you spent less. You could start and stop whenever you liked. There was no discount if you were using an ad agency. There were all sorts of things that leveled the playing field. And so when you searched for contact lenses or winter coat, you may get a large retailer, you may get a startup. And it was the decision which ads to appear were based on not just how much people were willing to pay in this auction, but also whether people were clicking on the ads and it was seen as relevant. Again, a way to level the playing field.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those principles, all of those principles hold true today, but I think you're right in that the more experienced retailers, maybe who have the best data or have been at this the longest and have been able to optimize it, or have hired the best or the smartest people, may have a leg up. And so what that means is it's harder for a smaller business to get started or a newer advertiser on Google to get started if you don't have that history. or that expertise. And you may not have the time or the patience to figure it all out. So we think about this stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think so I think we're trying to solve it in two ways. I think that initial experience, what's it like to get started for the first time, is something that we can get better at. I think the second thing is we are trying to introduce a lot more automation into it. In some ways, to take the decisions out of the people and have data inform the decisions, where you should be able to say, hey, this is my business. Here's my website. Here are my goals. I'm looking for website visitors. I'm looking for people to fill in a lead form. I'm looking for a return on ad spend of $5, meaning when I spend $1, I need to make at least $5 in sales for that to be profitable. And then to take care of the rest, automatically generate ads, automatically target keywords, automatically decide like which customer sees which ad and which device, and do it all automatically. And I think ultimately that is the ideal state, but it's taken a while to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the criticism's fair.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're thinking about it. Let's just put it that way. That's a very, very honest and straightforward response. So I'm glad a company the size of yours is being very thoughtful about that. So thanks for that. Last question. What's next? There's always something next to Google. What's in the tickle trunk that you can talk about? Usually you're under, some kind of, you can't talk or else you're thrown out under the subway kind of rules. But is there anything you could share with us from Google that's in the tickle trunk, or what you're working on for what's next?
Well, I think there's something to be said again for making online marketing, even easier and more measurable. So, I think again, Google was this revolutionary idea to make advertising targeted and measurable and effective. And I still think there's a lot more we can do. As an example, I think it's much easier for a retailer to understand and quantify their Google investment if they sell only online versus if you have stores.
Right.
And if you have stores, it's a lot more complicated to understand, well, who's going to my store? And did they visit my store? Or did they buy something? If they bought something, how much? And do they shop between the two channels? So I think there's a lot of work that we're investing very specific to retail to help make our results even more obvious and easier to understand, where you don't need like a PhD in math to understand if this like highly automated and effective investment's working. I think YouTube is probably another area that I would draw attention to, where, as you can imagine, we've seen a lot more watch time on YouTube during the pandemic. And I think the shifts in consumer video from like cable or traditional television to streaming, whether it's YouTube or Netflix or other things, has been a tailwind for YouTube and others in the online video space. I think historically, marketers and retailers included have seen YouTube as a place to build brands, as maybe a replacement or complement to a TV buy. But, there's so much commercial intent on YouTube, unboxing videos, product reviews, that I think personally we haven't done a good enough job making that, the best marketing opportunity that it can be for brands and for retailers. So finding a way for retailers and brands to harness that commercial intent on YouTube and make it a really, really effective marketing and sales channel, not just a brand channel, is something where we've invested a ton of time. And is there a way to make a video ad on YouTube as effective as that little search text ad? I think there is, and we're on our way, but that's been like a big, big area of focus here as well.
Well,
so those would be the two that I'd focus on.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, as you know, I've got a bunch of YouTube channels myself, and it's interesting as I think through the organic versus paid, and even down to the categories. I have many business podcasts, but there's not a business category, right? It's news and politics. I always thought, that's interesting. So maybe you take that back to your development team. Maybe that categorization of the organic videos can help amplify. There you go. I will. Here's my consulting to Google. Listen, Eric, always a treat to talk with you. We've known each other a long time, and it's been very fruitful, and I always learn something when I talk to you. So thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail's Real Treat, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks again for having me, and I really do hope this time is the next time I see you in person. So
right on. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts, so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.